Pipeline. That's the question. And again, he was doing an interview. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, was doing an interview with Cochrane there on CBC. And did we get a clear answer? We'll play this clip, and you tell me if you got a clear answer out of it.
I know you've got to go, but I need to build on the project question. I need to ask you about Alberta, and I need to ask you about the oil and gas sector, because I know you said you want to create an energy superpower, clean and conventional energy. A pipeline is a possibility, but not a certainty. And Alberta would say one at minimum is what is needed, maybe three, to the north, to the east, and to the west. This is what the Premier said. Is that a reasonable expectation for the Premier of Alberta? And the frustration over this, and you know as someone who grew up in Edmonton, it's driving a lot of the resentment to the national government of Alberta. So as Prime Minister, how do you confront that?
I think there's a couple of things. One is, let's recognize a few facts in terms of pipelines that have been built to Tidewater and projects opening up, whether it's TMX, whether it's Cedar LNG, and beyond. There's a series of LNG projects. More can be done, more should be done, and from our perspective, more will be done. So we will be moving through this process to make these types of projects possible. Now, we don't begin and end the conversation. It's remarkable in some circles. This conversation starts and ends with pipelines.
But that is what it's become politically, right?
No, it's not. No, that is not what it's become politically. That is not what it's become for Canada. Canada is a nation. Canadians want, yes, they want energy pipelines that make sense. They also want grid connections between our clean grids. They want actually less carbon. So they want carbon capture and storage pathways project to move forward. They want broader corridors, for example, Gray's Point in Nunavut, that open up whole swaths of the country to new trade. They want critical minerals so that we are sovereign in the most important components of the future. All of those things are possible. And the more we're doing more of them, the more likely this is going to succeed. That's why these meetings and this process is so important. That's why the legislation that we're putting forward, we will put forward in coming days, is so ambitious. We are in a crisis. We can control our destiny. We are a brave, bold, confident nation. We are the true north, strong and free. But freedom is something you earn every day. And that strength is something we need to reinforce.
But how do you confront the separatist sentiment that is there in Alberta? There's a possibility of a referendum next year. I mean, how do you approach it?
This is the greatest country in the world. And this is a country that works. It's a government that's committed to working with Canadians across the country. And I know you're pressed for time now. You're pressed for time. One of us, we're both pressed for time. I got things to do.
There you go. He's pressed for time. You get an answer out of that?
What I was thinking of there when I was listening to that is, what would it be like for a cop if they pulled over Mark Carney when it's on suspicion of speeding? He'd be like, "Okay, officer, number one, speed is a concept that not a lot of Canadians understand this, but it's just like, shut up, just speak English." He's let's be honest, like to give him his due and to be empathetic here. He's a politician and he's trying to not be clear. That's by design.
He said he's not a politician. He said himself he's not a politician.
Well, he is now. And he's trying not to be clear because he wants to hold on to all of his oranges for as long as he can before he trips over. And he's eventually going to trip over because eventually he's going to have to alienate one group, at least one of several groups who are very very noisy and like to agitate. And like we said ages ago, the likelihood is pretty strong, isn't it, that he's not going to alienate Quebec and he's not going to alienate the First Nations. He's going to choose to alienate Alberta. And he's just trying to go as long as he can before he drops the hammer and destroys the dreams of Albertans. And as a consequence, he sounds like an absolute fool, doesn't he? He just sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, and I like how he kind of tried to play Cochrane there by just like, I know you're busy. Just like basically saying, I'm done answering this question. That I just spun around for 2.5 minutes of nothing burger.
I mean, the whole interview was like that. It was a very unedifying. Was it unedifying interview? I don't know why he consented to do it. I guess it's just to have his face on TV, to reassure some people that just want to hear him speak or something like that. But it was just a complete waste of time.
Yeah,
he's become such a politician.
Yeah, but Cochrane didn't press him like the BBC journalist pressed him. Like, definitely, he seemed more amicable towards him instead of pressing him on. This is the biggest question in Canada right now. Will you build a pipeline or not? And that's the whole separatist movement. Will you build a pipeline or not? That is the question. That is the absolute question and because in the polls, 80% of Canadians want it.
Mm-hmm. But he's going on about how Canadians want carbon capture. I mean, right. I don't know about you. I can't go a day without being accosted by somebody in the street that says, "When are we going to get that carbon capture?" They're so keen for that, aren't they? Non-stop carbon capture that people want. And Carney's obviously heard that.
So the CBC gets all the money, and they do a really poor job of getting the answer that Canadians want. That is the question. That is the question. We needed a yes or no answer. Like, there's no way this would have happened in the U.S., like that you would go that long without an answer to that same question. Like, that is the question in Canada right now. That is the question.
I mean, that's correct. And that should have been at least 50% of this interview. Should have just been like ratcheting up the pressure until you got an answer. If Cochrane was, let's be fair to him, if he was free to ask what he wanted to ask, that's the most generous interpretation of his interview style, I would say. I'd rather not go down the other path. But he would have spent 50% on that. And then he also would have asked questions. I mean, this was done on the day the King was in Canada. Obviously, one of the questions is to say, most Canadians don't even want a monarchy anymore. Or at least it's 50-50. Like, what have you done this for? A lot of people don't want this. How are you going to justify this? And, Quebec, among them, who just voted for your party, now you bring in old Kingy boy over. Like, how do you justify that? How do you explain that to Canadians? That would be a good question to ask. Then there's things like the EV mandate, which obviously we talk about every day, but that's quite consequential because it concerns the future of his favorite industry, apparently, which is the auto manufacturing industry. But I mean, come on, there are so many questions that could be asked. And then you have to say, and this is what they set themselves up for, the Liberals and the CBC together in concert. You're forced to ask the question, is he going soft on him because he has a job now, Mr. Cochrane, because of Mark Carney? Mark Carney guaranteed his job by winning that election. Or kind of winning a minority. Like, that's the elephant in the room. Is there going to be any acknowledgement of that whatsoever? Obviously not. They don't play by those rules, do they? They kind of just do whatever they want. They make the rules, if anything.
And the reason that it's the question is for two big reasons that I can think of. One, we have a pending unity crisis that could actually tear Canada apart based on this answer to this question. Will we have a pipeline? And then on the economy, which is, all indicators are showing it's in a tough spot and in a storm, that would actually help our economy as well. It is the question that requires an answer, and it will determine the path of this Liberal Party over the next 4 years or less.
Mm-hmm. But I really do think it comes down in the back rooms, in the shadowy corners of the Liberal empire. I'm sure they have very frank conversations about this, and I'm fairly confident that it will boil down to Quebec or Alberta. Which one? Like, which one are we gonna risk upsetting? And it's Alberta, isn't it? It has to be Alberta because the Liberal Party basically exists for Quebec. That's what it is. Quebec is its sort of heartland.
Even my point, though, the CBC should have went into that interview. Cochrane should have went to get an answer to that question, and it should have been pressing on that question, not basically, like a jovial kind of like discussion that didn't seem to have any consequences or any real meaning or answer at the end of it. It was just the same stuff over and over again. And that is a failure on CBC's part right there. If they don't recognize that that's the question that Canadians need answered, or he's just not up to the task of asking that question properly over and over again.
And he was also, the style was pretty uncomfortable, at least for me to watch, the way that he was so deferent and he was so fawning almost over Mark Carney, and he allowed Mark Carney to like snap back and interrupt his questions and reframe the question. Like Carney just played with him in his hands, and he just let it happen.
Steamrolled him for sure. Yeah, but I mean, again,
as the interviewer, especially when it's the prime minister, you are the boss. That's how it works in our democratic system. As the interviewer, you're the king of the world for that like 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever. You decide what questions are asked, how they're asked, where it goes. You can interrupt whenever you want. All the rest of it, like those are the rules, and that's the contrast I think that you're observing with the Sky News journalist, the British journalist. She was playing, even though she's a bit of a mediocrity in my opinion, not a particularly stellar interviewer, but she played by those rules, and she took charge of that interview. Whereas in this situation here, this was just yet another meeting chaired by His Majesty Mark Carney, wasn't it? And Cochrane was just there. He was just a delegate to hear the wise words of the sage.
And Danielle Smith, with a reaction out there, she posted on LinkedIn that Albertans need an answer. And I mean, it's Danielle Smith is saying the same thing over and over again, right? Where's the answer? Why is Bill 69 still in place? Why is there emissions cap? All those things. And I can guarantee it, if Cochrane was sitting in front of Danielle Smith, she would have pressed her. He would have pressed her.
No, the easiest comparison to imagine is Polyev, who would have been slapped all over the place. And all kinds of gotcha questions would have been pulled out, wouldn't it? Like, you walked in front of a piece of graffiti that's associated with a group that we don't like at the CBC. Justify this, you Nazi. Like, all of that would have come up as usual. But when it's the saintly Mark Carney, it's just kind of like, what would you like to speak about, my lord?
So we're going to talk about it in a bit here too. Bill C-18, we're going to talk about it every day until they repeal it. We'll come back to it though. This is the Hollydome Blacklock story though. The promises deficit target later. So the cabinet promises a responsible target for deficit reduction, later. They promise to cut waste, but they have no fixed deadline. So transfers to provinces and territories and individuals will be maintained, said the throne speech. Last year's federal deficit, ready for this, was 55% over the target to $61.9 billion. 55% over budget. Like, you should get fired for that. They didn't get fired. They got 4 more years for it.
I would say to people, if you're new to politics, then what this means is when they say, we'll do it later in terms of balancing the budget, that means we're not going to balance the budget. It's as simple as that. We have absolutely no intention whatsoever of balancing the budget. We don't care about it. We're just going to keep borrowing so that we look good in the next few years, and it'll be the next government's problem.
Yeah, and this is Friedland. She said this in April 30th, 2024, when she was still the finance minister. Let's be honest on what austerity in a shrunken federal government would mean for Canadians. It would mean you have to fend for yourselves. This is not how we do things in Canada. Here we care for one another. Today we're turning our younger generation, those who care about them, to say our government is at your service. No, you're saying we're indebting our future, our younger generation, to economic stagnation and poverty. Utter nonsense.
Well, particularly, it's ironic, isn't there, that she says we're turning to our younger generation. I mean, yeah, that is accurate, actually. Christy Freeland is right there. They are turning to the younger generation to pay this debt.
Yeah, to the bill. Here's your
40
bill.
years' time.
Here's your bill.
And I mean, I say pay the debt. It's probably not going to be a question of paying the debt. If it continues like this, it will be a question of paying in indirect means for the default of the Canadian federal government, which is a lot worse than having to pay a lot of debt, because that means that nobody will look at Canada as a safe place for money anymore. And that means a poverty spiral, as happened in Argentina. So it's actually a bit worse than that. But at the minute, if you look at the interest payments, I mean, the interest payments are already higher than, I think it's not just defense spending. I think it's even bigger. Yeah, it's possibly even healthcare. I mean, this is fundamentally insane. And to think that we have now in charge of this country the prince of the technocrats, the man that presents himself as the world's foremost expert on finance and economics, not just Canada's, but the world's. That's his kind of That's how he sells himself and how his supporters sell him. And yet he's overseeing not just that, not just a situation where interest payments are more than like big ticket items for the government, but where it's going to get worse. And he thinks that's fine. And again, like, you want to talk about like Cochrane and the CBC, not a question asked about that. Because they, in fairness, they don't even know anything about economics anyway, do they? But the thing is, that's a crisis. That's a pretty big crisis, isn't it? And it's just being sort of left to stink up a corner of the room.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about this economic storm that's brewing across Canada. Ontario, record-setting mortgage delinquencies, enormously concerning. Of course it's concerning. I mean, and definitely the Toronto condo market is actually collapsed. Values have collapsed. People are defaulting, and then they're being sued on top of it by the developers. You know, like, for these drops in real estate values, and then, you know, people, they want them to complete the deals, and then people are saying, why would I complete a deal that's, you know, hundreds of thousands, the value of the property is hundreds of thousands of dollars lower than what you're asking me to pay. So they're obviously walking away from their deposits and that. And it's a mess. It's a mess, it's a mess, it's a mess. And that's one of the reasons I believe that the Bank of Canada has to cut, and they should do it aggressively. Loblaws warning, this is out of a Blog TO piece. Loblaws is warning Canadians grocery prices are about to skyrocket. So
I would just say about the Toronto thing. You're saying interest rates is like that's possibly a solution. I would say from the government's perspective, looking at all these empty or, you know, like for sale condos that aren't going anywhere, another answer from their perspective might be immigration. Again, even though they've promised to get it under control. So keep an eye on that, because that's how if they fix demand, that's what they've done for the last 10, 20 years or whatever. They might do it again. This Loblaws thing, though, is a funny one, because it's like, I looked at the document and they show how they've got, like, they have this T, don't they? They've created a little sign and they put a T on it, and that means that the tariff is affected, that there's a tariff in play, and that's why prices have increased. But I think the real story here is where they go on in that document and they say, look, we're trying to buy things from other markets, and it's stuff like eggs, rice, coffee, cocoa, and pasta, I think, is in there. Like, these are just staples. You can buy these anywhere. You know, I mean, are they actually doing a good enough job of looking around for alternative sources? That would be my immediate question.
And then Holly Doan had a post actually here too. You know, Mark Carney put out his post. Government has a mandate to bring down costs, cut taxes, ensure Canadians can keep more of their paychecks. And her question is on that everybody's asking too, that has any kind of economic background. What is the deficit? Where's the budget? Like, where's the plan? Remember, I have a plan. Poilievre does not have a plan. I have a plan. Where's the plan? Where is the plan?
And yeah, I mean, what's the honest answer as well to how he expects? Because Holly Doney is asking about the deficit. What's the actual, real, honest answer to that question? How's the deficit going to be paid down? And if Mark Carney's career so far is any indication of what's going to happen, I think our good friend inflation might have something to do with the answer of how this enormous, gigantic pile of gold that the Canadian government is borrowing every month to pay for the basics. I think inflation might be looked upon as an idea for how to pay for that, because that's kind of what happened at the Bank of England.
Yeah, and this from the National Post in an opinion piece. Carney can't be trusted until he removes Stephen Guilbeault and others like him from cabinet. And that is, I mean, the question the statement you and I have said several times. Like, it's the same group of people, and Stephen Guilbeault, you know, he's been very vocal on the pipeline thing. And I'm not sure if Alberta's going to trust much from the Carney Liberals until people like that are either silenced, moved out of cabinet, or I don't know if he still has a big role. And, you know, especially since how he's, you know, the lieutenant for Quebec, and Quebec is one of the roadblocks.
Yeah, I mean, all the signs, if you're being honest with yourself, you're not seeing it through wild rose tinted glasses, and you're being honest with yourself, all of the signs here suggest that he's just going to continue the Trudeau style, really, but just be a a bit clever about the way that they speak about it, and to make really vague promises. But everything that they've done, like just the way that Carney's speaking, it's almost like, in many ways, politics is compared to relationships, isn't it? Like romantic relationships. And it's almost like Alberta is like asking, do you love me? And Carney is like going on a monologue, a 10-minute monologue, which amounts to sort of maybe. In that scenario, obviously the person that says that doesn't love you. Sorry to break it to you out there if you're going through this yourself. They don't love you in that situation. And just like this, Carney doesn't love Alberta, doesn't love pipelines, and he's not saying yes. He's doing everything he can to avoid saying no. But I mean, and then the likes of Gil Ball being involved, and the current environment minister as well. It's the signs are bleak. They're very, very bad.
Yeah, it's not that, it's not that I don't love you. It's like, can't we just be friends?
Can you still give me a ride to? I need a ride to work. Can we still be friends?
Can I get some cash? Yeah. Can I get some cash? Like, is there any cash you have left there? Wildfires burning across the prairies, though. Wildfires burning across the prairies. And you can expect them to trot that out soon, talk about how we need to talk about climate change and not oil and gas. That'll be used. I'm sure that's coming. Those stories will be coming shortly. But right now, there's 21 active wildfires burning Saskatchewan, and that's causing some highway closures in northern Manitoba. About 600 residents have left the town of Lynn Lake, and you were saying Flin Flon as well.
Flin Flon has been told to prepare for. It's on the verge of evacuation, whatever that means exactly. I don't know, but they've been told to prepare to leave. 15
wildfires right now burning in Manitoba, and I've been to Flin Flon. I went there to visit the mine in Flin Flon. The town is basically wrapped around the mine. It's just like the town. They just start building houses around it. It's just wrapped right around town, like most more northern communities. They're there because of the resources, and that's what makes communities outside of the metro areas. In Alberta, there's about 25 active fires Tuesday afternoon, 7 of which are deemed out of control. So wildfires going in prairies. There you go. And the Liberals said that they're going to take some decisive action and rebuild the Canadian military. They've got lots of work to do for sure. It says the Liberals will take immediate decisive action to boost military, and that's the Defense Minister, David McGuinty. He added that joining Europe's Rearm Europe scheme, announced by King Charles, would give Canada access to a $1.25 trillion defense market. 1.25 million.
I mean, that's...
Trillion, not, I should say.
It is trillion, yeah. That's the European countries, that's like their defense budgets, I guess, added together. And so therefore the potential to sell into that. More likely to buy, though, I would say, since Canada doesn't really do an awful lot of production in that department. I mean, that's theoretically kind of interesting, isn't it? That is something concrete. But the problem is, he's just here promised immediate and decisive action and nothing concrete except that. No. Except, we're going to join this Rearm Europe thing.
Yeah. Except for the words.
Exactly. And he also didn't take any questions. He just walked out. Didn't take questions from the press. So
he wouldn't like to answer most of them.
Basically, he refused to provide actual specifics and concrete details after making this enormous claim, which requires a lot of evidence to back it up. But he made the claim and then didn't evidence it, and then trotted off out the door right away. So I mean, it's not gonna put many people at ease, I don't think.
The bureaucrats of DND are supposed to come to work 3 days a week. Imagine that tough slugging 3 days a week. You have to come into the office, and they don't even manage that. I think we did that story a while ago, and only 80% of them didn't even come in for the 3 days a week. Tough.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know what the latest data is, or are, I should say, but maybe it's changed now. But that was a little while ago, wasn't it? They've got a lot of property in Ottawa, and they've got a very cool building. It's like almost like a landmark in sort of the west end of Ottawa. I don't know why you wouldn't want to go there. It's a cool workplace.
And Donald Trump threw down again. He just said the bill for the Golden Dome for Canada is $61 billion or zero. And he said if you join the Americans, it's zero. If you don't, it's $61 billion. And he put out there quite a bit that Canada is considering the offer. I don't know who's considering the offer.
I mean, the thing is, the military, like, you know, where our good friend and ally, Stephen Fuhr, his job now is procurement, isn't it? Defense procurement. That's always been a bit of a problem for not just the Canadian government, but many governments. They've found it really, really hard to actually find the stuff to buy, because it's one thing to say, all right, we're going to spend this much money on military equipment, but it's another thing to actually find it and make sure it's good and not just garbage, like we've seen, you know, lots of examples of that in the Canadian military. So in that sense, it might actually be something that would appeal to the federal government, because they can say, all right, our defense spending is now 2.5% of GDP or something like that. And then all they've really done is chuck money at Donald Trump. So it would be an easy way in terms of like procurement. You wouldn't have to think very much. You could just give money and then say, look at this percentage of GDP that we're spending.
And the U.S. halts visa appointments and plans expanded social media vetting for students coming into the United States. That thing is really heating up there with Marco Rubio there. This is like that spat that kind of started with Harvard not releasing information, and then all of a sudden, you know, like it's turning into quite the fight down there.
Well, this iteration of the Republican Party, or even like this iteration of the Trump movement, is a lot savvier and a lot more ruthless as well, I would say, a lot more systematic in the way that it intends to govern, and also in the way that it intends to dismantle the forces that have been erected by the left, which is, you know, has political representation in the Democratic Party. They've set up all kinds of things across the whole of US society, and the universities are absolutely key to the power of the left and the power of ultimately the Democratic Party. And, you know, the likes of Harvard University, I mean, which is the main one in the crosshairs right now, that is that is like a jewel, a shining jewel in the empire of the American left. So it makes sense that they would target it. But what's interesting is that they didn't do that. Trump won, 2016 Trump. He didn't do that. He didn't do any of that stuff, really. This is a new approach from the right. And the right is behaving like the left, because the left did this in the 60s to get here, and the 50s as well, actually, to get here in the first place. So they're imitating their enemies, which is quite interesting.
And then I would say that I don't think in 2016 he had, you know, quite capable people like Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is basically ruthless when he's being questioned as well. And he may well be a contender for the presidency. He may well be a contender for the presidency. And even Trump has said that it'll be a thing between Vance and Rubio, likely.
I would say there is no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that Rubio will be right out there. But I feel like in terms of the MAGA movement, it matters who's the successor, who's kind of given the pat on the shoulders. And I reckon it's much more likely to be Vance that's given that official approval.
Yeah. I mean, they could get 12 years out of it with Vance getting 2 years, and then Rubio is vice, and then you get another 8 years out of the two of them, right? And then running
16 years then, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That's maybe wishful thinking for the Republicans, but yeah. The Democrats don't look like they're up to much right now, so they can think like that now, can't they?
They're in self-destruction mode over and over again, and all that stuff coming out about the auto pen and who's running it, and it seems like everybody's running that auto pen. But a new face, there you go, at COP30, saying that there's a new term coming out, economic denial. This is the one that's going to be up at the podium, and we'll likely hear that from, we'll know when Mark Carney's been infected by it, but he'll start using that economic denial. And he's actually said words similar to it already, that Canadians want carbon capture and they want all these things. There you go. And now
they
they're
just
saying
love that word, don't they? Which is inextricably, you cannot use a term like that, like climate denier, and now they want to say economic denier. I mean, God's sake.
It's
But
all
you
about
can't
marketing.
use that term without thinking about the Holocaust, because that's how that term was popularized in public discussion about Holocaust denial. It's an obvious attempt to try and associate those two things, which is just so disreputable, so dishonest, such a repulsive thing to do. I feel like these people should get on their knees and apologize. They should go to the Western Wall in Jerusalem and say sorry for being so vulgar as that.
Yeah, and then there's this watchdog that finds no evidence that even Joe Biden knew of the crucial climate executive orders that he supposedly signed with the auto pen. So there's a pro-energy group that's renewing its call for investigation over half a dozen Biden administration executive actions that related to climate that believes should be deemed null and void. Like there's a lot of talk now.
There are many examples of that.
There's a lot of talk about who had access to this auto pen, including for the pardons, including for a bunch of executive orders. There you go. They didn't. Maybe it's because they didn't have that Sharpie, that big black Sharpie that Donald Trump uses in the office every day. He basically has one of those meetings a day, and Sharpie stock must be going through the roof.
Well, it's also that kind of ostentatious display of signing the executive orders and taking questions from random journalists. That sort of is going the extra mile to prove that he is compos mentis and he is aware of what he's doing in terms of these executive orders. Whereas with Biden, numerous friendly journalists, Democratic Party affiliate journalists, have come out now and said that they had conversations with Biden and like just on his own, or sort of like behind the scenes, let's say, not an interview, but just a conversation in the White House or something like that. And they asked him about his executive orders, and he had, he's under the impression that they were in some cases doing the opposite of what they actually did, and he was just unaware. So that, clearly there's. Can you imagine? If Biden was forced to sit down like that and sign it with the press saying, "All right, so what about this, and like constantly talking about the executive order in front of him? I think it's obvious that he wouldn't really have known the details, because he didn't seem to know the details about anything.
Yeah, you can hate Trump all you want, but I would like it if Carney would sit down and discuss everything with the reporters every day like that. And some reporters that actually have the guts and integrity to ask the right questions as well, not the ones that are funded by the government. Allow other people.
Well, Carney is at least willing to sign a blank piece of paper for the cameras.
Yeah.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah. And that goes back to our Bill C-18 Online News Act that still exists in Canada. We have a co-opted, state-funded media that is clearly compromised. We talked about Cochrane's performance there. And until we get that fixed, this is what we're going to get. The government selectively funds some media, and at the same time also puts its knee in the throat of the other ones and trying to choke them off. And that's supposedly happening in a free and democratic society.
Yeah, well, on Cochrane, I would say I'm not necessarily saying that he's, or at least I wouldn't subscribe to the idea that he's some kind of like sinister partisan that is trying to conspire somehow to make Mark Carney look good. I don't necessarily think that's true. Or I don't think we can know that anyway, put it that way. But what I would say is that the CBC is very friendly to the Liberal Party. That's just undeniable. People who deny that now, I feel, have kind of lost their marbles, really. But I'm happy to hear from them, happy to hear their arguments. But I don't think it's realistic to make that argument. But there's that, and then there's also the fact that there's an elephant in the room, as we've said many times, which is that David Cochrane's mortgage. And he even discussed it in that interview. He discussed when he bought his first house when he was working for CBC, so paid for by CBC. But his mortgage, if he's got kids, then the clothes on his kids' back and all the rest of it, that is all dependent on Mark Carney winning the election. That's completely insane that was the situation that he was put in, and that we're all put in as well. So, and it's just, you can't ever separate those two things. Pierre Poilievre said he was going to basically abolish the English language CBC. David Cochrane would have lost his job. Mark Carney, on the contrary, said he was going to increase the funding for the CBC as well as keep David in work there. So obviously he has a horse in the race, and it's just so it's just so slimy, isn't it, to watch it? So while we might not know what's inside of David Cochrane's head, we can certainly look at it and say that it stinks, because it obviously does. And the same is true to a much lesser extent about the subsidized media outlets in Canada, which is subsidized by the taxpayer, because the Liberal Party decided to give them money and subsidize 35% of their journalists' salaries.
Selectively decided, too. Yeah, selectively decided who gets it and who doesn't get it. Yeah.
Indeed.
Let's move on to BC and some local news here. Bell Canada announced that it's going to open 6 AI data centers in British Columbia as part of a plan to create the largest AI compute project in Canada. There you go. It'll provide about 500 megawatts of hydroelectric powered AI compute capacity here.
And it's Kamloops again. Kamloops is also on the menu for TELUS.
Yeah, so TELUS
big times in Kamloops.
TELUS is the next one on here. TELUS is going to spend $70 billion over the next 5 years to enhance connectivity, including through improvements to network infrastructure and building an AI intelligent data center. Again, the funding will go towards bolstering fiber connectivity between BC, Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario. There you go. But Kamloops gets some of that money too. It says it's planning 2 new AI data centers in Kamloops. Kamloops, I think, is one of the chosen areas because it is one of the hottest and gets the most sunshine. So I imagine solar is going to play a role there because Kamloops being one of the hottest and most sunshine areas, and that's where I was born, in the Kamloops. I didn't live there very long though, but Kamloops, BC. So we used to be a big government town and a rail town.
Well, it used to be the interior town, didn't it? Till Kelowna stole its lunch.
Yeah.
But I would say it could still be if rail were to be expanded, I think Kamloops would naturally become more important again. But another thing about Kamloops, because they also mentioned Merritt, didn't they? If you just go on a map, on a satellite map, and you look at that area between Merritt and Kamloops, there's a lot of land there, which is certainly not true in like the Okanagan, for example, which is everything that's flat is either agricultural or built on, and then it's all hills. Whereas around there, they actually have a bit of like land that you could at least have a solar farm on. Yeah, so I think
like desert-like
that's
land
appeal,
too,
isn't it?
Because in Kamloops, they're like on the I can't remember which side of the town it is. On the town side of the river, most of those hills are barren too. Like not a lot of forest on there, so there's kind of more of a like desert kind of an environment. And the same thing goes for Merritt on the hillsides on the one side of town, right? So.
Yeah, it's like what you have in Eastern Washington as well. It's similar sort of geography. But I just want to say, somebody's just said, Poilievre said he wouldn't abolish the CBC, just defund it. And I am aware of that, but what I said was basically abolish the English language, because he said he was going to fund the French one. But what he said was defund, so in other words, cut it loose. So my question to you there would be, do you think that the CBC would be able to survive as an independent media organization in Canada? Do you think it would be a viable commercial entity? Because I really don't. I don't think it doesn't. Nobody listens to it now. Nobody cares now. I don't think they're going to be able to self-fund.
Maybe if you cut the executives out of the equation, some of the reporters could survive, but the executives are there deep into the trough. I mean, the first thing they did when they got that raise, the $100 million, was that they stuck their face in the trough and took a cut right off the top.
Yeah, to be rewarded for their lobbying, perhaps. A cynic could argue that, at least. So,
hot summer expected in British Columbia, particularly in the interior. There you go. Get your solar panels out. And it's going to be a hot one. It's going to be. We're going to get a lot of those, people talking about how we need not to have an oil pipeline.
Well, exactly. They're going to blame. They've shown there, like Guilbeault, who we mentioned earlier. I'm not convinced that he's stupid. I don't think really any of them are stupid. So I'm going to rule that out. So I think that it is actually quite a devious thing that he does, where he tries to associate things like the carbon tax. So the reduction of carbon emissions in Canada, he tries to associate that with the global temperature, which you could argue there's a very tenuous link between those two things. But it's like saying that there's a link between how much weight the Earth is bearing when you're on the earth and when you're not on the earth as a single human being. It's like, it's so trivial, the amount of impact that Canada has. But yeah, he's done that so many times in the past that I'm sure he'll do it again. So, if, like, God forbid, some town gets burned down again, like Jasper or or Lytton or whatever, I'm sure that will be done, won't it?
Where's all the wildfire mitigation? And we've talked about this. We've done so many stories about it here in British Columbia. Where's all the wildfire mitigation that's being done? Like, I look out the window again, and I look on the west side here, and still all the trees are just on top of the houses. And I think we're going to get wildfire mitigation when the insurers stop insuring homes, and that's coming. They've been talking about it already, that they're not going to insure homes that have pine trees hanging over the roofs. And
well, that's already happened in California, hasn't it? After that horrible fire they had, a lot of the insurers are just saying, they'd already said, hadn't they? Like, there's no way we're insuring this.
Well, I know I've talked to a few companies that actually do the satellite mapping, and the insurance companies are going to start using that and start looking at your home and seeing the trees around your house, and they'll say, well, we're not insuring you for wildfire. They're a risk.
And then people are going to try and cut them down, and I'm sure there'll be some environmental defense or whatever. One of those groups will come out and start chaining themselves to people's trees.
They had that. I don't know if it got passed here, and I can't remember if it got passed or not in Kelowna. They wanted you to have to cut a tree down in your yard. You had to get a permit from the city. They wanted that here. So any kind of tree that you planted, you would have to get a permit to cut it down.
I mean, I can understand that in England, where I spent many a year, because England is, and I would advise anybody that goes to England, like, remember what I'm saying here and look around. England is like denuded of trees. It's like, it's such an ugly, hopeless landscape in so many ways, outside of a few little places like Surrey and some other places. There aren't really any trees in England, or at least nowhere near the sort of level you see in Germany or France or other countries like that, or obviously Canada. But to talk like that in Canada is insane. It's absolutely insane. It's like Canada's got a very healthy tree situation, which I'm very sort of grateful for. But I don't think we need to protect individual trees in Canada, do we? It's just absurd.
Here's the Canadian forecast, the summer forecast. Hot, hot, hot. Lots of stuff above normal. And then in the Winnipeg, Regina, Edmonton area, well above normal. And there's poor St. John's again, getting left out. And they're just at near normal. I'm sure they're, they're whining there.
Even in Callaway?
It's having a couple of scooter beers.
They're going to be sunbathing.
They're like, again, we're bummed out. A BC teacher handed a 15-year ban for having a sexual relationship with a grade 12 student. Too many of these stories. We would do way, way too many of these stories. And then, the punishment, just 15 years, right? And this is, they started the relationship while they were in school, but then it continued into a more robust relationship after she graduated.
At least this is actually a real... this is actual professional misconduct, unlike the people that get done for professional misconduct in BC who've done something completely trivial, like put their hand on a kid's shoulder or something, or some of the ones we do are just hilarious, aren't they? But this does happen too often. And yet, at times like this, I pity the poor Catholic Church, which is just associated with this kind of activity in a lot of people's minds. And yet, look how often we see it in schools. It's like relentless, isn't it?
Yeah, like how I shouldn't say she or whatever, because in this story here, it doesn't identify if it was a male or female teacher or student, right?
Male teacher, but it doesn't reveal the sex of the student. Yeah.
There you go. And then in the Kelowna one, we did the story yesterday. Like an amazingly large cost for 2 trees, $300K. And our own news director, Josh Duncan, went out and did a little search online for the biggest Christmas trees, and he found on this website that sells magnificent giant trees for I think it was $28,000 for 2 of them or something like that, $17,000 a piece or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, that is crackers, isn't it? Because again, we're talking about trees and Canada. Like, Why don't you just ask somebody with a truck or something to go and cut one down? I'm sure they do it for like a couple of $1,000s.
These apparently are artificial, but this website here sells to all the malls and that, you know, sell these massive trees. And I don't know, maybe the city of Kelowna doesn't have ChatGPT, or I don't know. Josh found it in a couple of minutes though, because he thought that was very, very expensive. So,
I mean, I'm sure there's an explanation. I haven't actually read this story.
I think we're going to have to find out.
My apologies to the city of Kelowna.
I think we're going to have to find out, because and it's a question worth asking, right? Like, how much are trees anyway?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm looking at the story now. There's attempts to excuse it here, but yeah, it was Lovegrove. So that quote comes from Lovegrove, who said it was an amazingly large cost.
For an amazingly large tree. But the tree in Rutland,
and he says it's almost the size of the grant we got from growing our community canopy, which is all the trees, the trees in Kelowna. So that is.
And this is for an artificial tree. But again, they do have a tree. They're just replacing them. I mean, I don't know if you want. How much of the tree do you actually see after you decorate it? Is the real question. I mean, how much of the tree is actually there after you're finished decorating it?
Mm.
That's the question. Minimum wage goes up.
But there are many examples of this, aren't there? Like that infamous dog park, which was just like a tiny strip of land.
Yeah.
And that was a fortune. That was like $500,000 or something, or if not more. So there's a lot of questions about how this money is spent. And obviously, to go back to Bill C-18, that's in many ways, that's like one of the fundamental responsibilities of journalists, and certainly more like regional press. So that's the importance. Like, people wouldn't necessarily know about this kind of thing if it wasn't in the press.
Yeah, so we're gonna press on them and see why it costs so much, and then why, like this website that Josh found, like why from $28,000 for 2 trees to 10 times that for 300,000. What's in these trees that makes them so special? Maybe they grant wishes.
Maybe they're made with bitcoins.
Ooh, there we go. Minimum wage goes up June 1st. And we got a little chart there showing you the progress of minimum wage from 2015 at $10.45 to effective June 1st. It'll be $17.85 here in British Columbia. And it's going up now with CPI.
That's a lot of money, isn't it?
It's going up with CPI. And that's approximately 130,000 employees in BC earn minimum wage.
So that's, if my calculations are accurate, that's about $37,000 a year.